Welcome to Redditors. Please hit the like button. Let's get on with the video.
Serious? What unexplained memories do you have from your childhood? I have a vivid memory of laying on my living room floor. I must have been about 10, and stressing about how I was a lesbian and how would I tell my parents and that I'd never have children. I remember thinking to myself, I'll have to deal with this later. Got up and carried on with my life. Only just remembered this a year or so ago. Not a lesbian. Once upon a time I was at a family friend's house and went to their toilet. For some reason I decided to open the lid of the box part of the toilet. What's it called? And for some reason there was a large live crayfish in there just chillin'. I can actually explain that. In areas that have a large amount of pollen in the air, algae can form in the upper tanks. When I was a kid you'd flush and it would leave a green line where the water enters the bowl. I've heard of people using goldfish to help keep it clean. Crayfish would also work, and are easy to catch. At a roller skating rink when I was about 12, I was just rolling towards the rink after getting food and suddenly I felt a prick on my right arm. I looked back and saw a woman holding a long, needle-like object. So I stopped and asked what the hell, and the lady said body fat test and then hightailed it out of there. The employees were all 17-year-old stoners, so by the time I got anyone's attention the woman was gone. I have been in the military and therefore tested for tons of illnesses and diseases which confirmed that I wasn't given random AIDS or something. But to this day I still have no effing clue what happened. It's likely that she was just mentally ill and thought she was doing a body fat test, or giving you some disease, or stealing your DNA or something. It's also possible that she was legitimately trying to infect you with some blood-borne illness, but failed to do so because the chances of transferring something via needle stick is still slim, especially when the original material isn't fresh. That is, dried blood. I have a story that was a mystery until a few years ago. When I was 5 I had a big bay window that faced into our backyard. One night I was sitting in bed with the curtains open reading when I suddenly heard a loud thump on the window. I look up and there's a effing zombie pressed up against my window staring at me with filmy eyes. I immediately lock up, not knowing what to do. I was the kid who never had nightmares, wasn't afraid of the dark. I knew monsters weren't real, but there one was, slowly sliding down the window, screaming. I ran out of the room practically gibbering in fear to my grandparents. Once they finally calmed me down and got me to talk, they took me outside and showed me nothing was there. That might have been the end of it, but when I woke up in the morning there was a greasy smear on the window and what looked like little pieces of flesh under the window. However, Weenie pointed this out to my grandparents. They said maybe a bird hit it or something and that was the end of it. For years and years after this I was terrified of the dark, had to have night lights everywhere and even wet my bed a couple times because the hallway was too dark to get to the restroom. I also started having really bad nightmares because of it. So this was an unexplained mystery to me for almost 20 years. When a couple Thanksgivings ago my family was talking about weird things that happened to us, I told my story and my uncle starts absolutely howling with laughter. Once he could breathe again he told me what had really happened. At the time my uncle was living in the house next door to us. He had a friend who worked in special effects for movies and had asked my uncle to let her refine the makeup look she was working on for a floating corpse. It turns out he was coming home from that, still had the makeup on because he wanted his wife to see it, and noticed me in bed when he cut through our backyard as a shortcut. Thinking it'd be hilarious he slammed against the window to scare me, then went home and promptly forgot about it for years, leaving me traumatized and mentally scarred. Back when I was about 6 or 7, I lived at a different house than I do now. My mom tucked me into bed like a normal night, but when I woke up I was in a very tight space. It was pitch black, I couldn't see, and felt very cramped. I started screaming for help. After about what seemed like 5 minutes of screaming, and some crying, something jerked whatever I was in, and I heard a zipping noise. I then saw my dad's face looking down on me. I was inside of a freaking suitcase. It turns out I was in a suitcase under the guest room's bed, where no one was sleeping. No one in my family knows how the heck I ended up there, or why it happened. It's not just a weird dream or something because my family still brings it up sometimes. Completely weird. Still don't know how it happened. TL. Doctor woke up in a suitcase. My father died when I was 3 years old. I vividly remember walking to the bed where he lay after he died, seeing his purple face with a dribble of the chicken soup my mother was trying to get him to eat still running down the left side of his face. I remember not crying, just being very confused. Then I walked out of the room and went to my bedroom and watched Power Rangers. To this day, my mother, who does not lie to me, adamantly maintains that she had a neighbor take me to their house as soon as my father began to pass away, and that I never saw him like that. She says that by the time I got back to the house, the room had been shut and locked for quite a while. The rest of my siblings attest to this, but my memory persists. Nobody ever told me what the man looked like when he died, let alone that he was aspirating chicken soup when it happened. I have no idea where the memory comes from, but that's the point of this thread, so there you go. I have a similar memory. I remember seeing my granddad in the funeral home after he had passed. I was about 5 years old. I spoke to my aunt who was with me at the time of the visit recently, and she also denies that any of the young children were allowed to see him and that we were all left at home. I had always thought of that memory as my last moment with him, but now I don't know if it actually happened. I haven't told anyone this, but here goes. I was around 8 at the time and went to bed. I woke up in the middle of the night to go poop. I fell asleep on the toilet, and when I woke up, the entire bathroom was covered in this red liquid. It wasn't blood. The consistency was more like cocktail sauce. I was scared that I somehow did it, so I spent like an hour cleaning it off of everything until the bathroom looked normal again. I went back to bed and forgot about it. I thought it was a dream. But then a few days later my mom was holding up a pair of my shorts, the ones I was wearing that night, and had been covered in that liquid, and I couldn't explain why. Ooh, I have another one. When I was around 7 I used to go to my cousin's house with my sister and play in their basement. Sometimes we would play hide and go seek. One time it was my turn to hide, so I hid in one of their closets that was filled with clothes and random stuff. Only it wasn't random stuff. It was quite a few bags filled of money. I never said anything to anyone at the time, but it always stuck with me. As I got older I began to question why my uncle had a video store in Philadelphia years after all other video stores went out of business. When I was around 3-4 I remember suddenly waking up at the bottom of my parents' pool, which was 9 feet at the deep end. When I woke up I just remember looking up and seeing the sun coming through the water. Then suddenly it went dark and I was being pulled up to the top. It was my mom saving me. I don't remember how I ended up at the bottom of the pool, but I was, and apparently almost died. My parents are constantly rewriting our family history. They just pretend things never happened. So I'll bring up some childhood memory and they try to convince me it never happened. I'm fully grown and now I never talk about my childhood because of dealing with that. So the majority of my childhood was all BS. There's actually a term for this. They are gaslighting you. I have a fuzzy memory of my foot being stuck in the toilet. Sock on. Foot wedged in the hole. No idea why I did that or how I got out. I remember flying backward as a very young kid and hitting the wall. I remember it actually didn't hurt, but also remember slumping down and saying to myself not to raise my head up. Decades later my older cousin told me my dad got mad at me during a family gathering and threw me against the wall. My grandfather told my dad he'd kill him if he ever struck me again. When I was about 4, I remember I had lost my first tooth and was terrified of the tooth fairy. That night I'm laying in bed crying my eyes out because I didn't want her to take me away, or something like that. I remember my dad charging into my room and the next thing I know my mom and dad are screaming at each other about how he needs to calm down and that he needs to go apologize to me, and then my dad comes in my room, starts rubbing my back and apologizing. I'm assuming he hit me, but I really don't want to ask them about it. I remember being like 4 or so and being sent to bed before my 3 siblings. I shared a room with my 2 sisters. My eldest sister's bed had a dust ruffle, and one of her clogs, it was the 70s, was sticking out about halfway from under it. I looked at it for some reason, and as I did, I saw it get pulled slowly under her bed. I freaked. My mom didn't believe me, but I will never forget it. I don't know why, but I found this so disturbing. While walking my dog, I found a mini crop circle in the middle of the field at my old house when I was like 8 years old. They were 3 circles about 3 feet in diameter, all perfectly placed as if the points of an equilateral triangle. I freaked out and my dad kept saying it was caused by the people that came to mow our lawn. He showed me a sword he kept hidden in his gun closet and said if any aliens came he would use this. That satisfied me and accepted it for years until one day I realized that the people that came to mow our lawn never went into the field. It was never mowed, so why would they be in the middle of it? I had a memory years ago of being in an Arabic feeling country, in someone's house, and my mother was trying on a sari, but I remembered it with a great deal of fear. Decades later, not long before he died, I asked my father about it, and he delivered. We'd traveled to Tunisia, this had to be around 1968, and we'd ended up with an invitation to dinner at some rich person's house. My mother was very outgoing and used to end up talking to all sorts of people, my father too. Come to think of it, the scene took place much as I had described it, but what neither my father or I knew was that the host was running his foot up and down my mother's leg under the table all throughout dinner. My mother, who often described herself as stupid but was in fact nothing of the sort, growing up in the 40s in Australia wasn't a good time for women, did not react. My father had a temper, it would have gone very badly. As my father said when he told me this was Tunisia in the 60s. If a few tourists had vanished or been found dead in an alley, there would have been no consequences. She totally pulled it off. Mum was kick-a. They've both been gone for 20 years and I still miss them almost every day. I was maybe 3 or 4. We were at my mom's co-worker's house for some get-together. Co-worker's daughter and I were pretty good friends. We decided to play hide and seek from our parents. Without them knowing, we got into one of the unlocked cars in the driveway. Eventually we get bored and start exploring the car. Friend finds nail polish, whiteout, and we start painting our nails. About 10 minutes later, our moms find us and they have tears running down their face. They wouldn't tell us why. Later, when I was older, my mom told me that the reason why they were so upset was that the one compartment in the car that we hadn't gone through was the compartment that had a loaded gun in it. The owner of the car ended up being a good family friend, like a grandfather to me. He never cleaned up the whiteout mess on his dash until he sold the car. He kept it as a reminder to always lock up the gun in his car. Not sure why this story sticks out to me in my memory. I just vividly remember the absolute terror my mom had on her face.